Good afternoon. I wanted to welcome everyone to our first open office hours recording. My name is Chris McNamee, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Product Strategy for the Tambellini Group. Today we have Vicki Tambellini, the CEO and President of the Tambellini Group, as well as Karen Boudreau-Shea, who is our Research Director for Student Success and the Strategic IT Planning. I'm happy to welcome Vicki and Karen today to Open Office Hours and to begin discussing the topic of managing a remote team. We know this is an issue that institutions and campuses are facing currently, and we are happy to be able to provide some perspective as well as some insights into what we are hearing from the market and the expertise that we have from our analysts. So with that, I will hand it over to Vicki and Karen to begin the discussion on what we're hearing and some of the recommendations that we are making for our institutions.
Thanks, Chris. It's a really interesting time right now, especially as institutions shift from having a workforce that has been predominantly on campus to looking at supporting administrative and faculty that have now been, in most cases, guided to work remotely. So the opportunities for miscommunication are significant, and the idea that people that have never worked from home are all of a sudden put in situations where now they're mandated to work from home is a new reality. And in many cases, people are not prepared at all for what that means. So the first thing that we want you to think about is that you want to be a guide and provide support and then let people work. So the idea here is that people that work in administrative functions, and especially in the area of faculty, are very talented. They're very skilled at the work they do, and they know what they're supposed to do. They've been doing their work in most cases for a very long time, and they don't really need to be managed in terms of producing the work. What they need most of all is the support for through the adjustment of having to work at home in an isolated environment. They've been used to having people around them. They've been used to the idea that they have colleagues to talk to. They've been used to having support possibly for getting their questions answered. They've had resources available to them when they have difficulty with equipment and so forth. And now all of a sudden they're thrust into an environment that they're completely unfamiliar with. And so they need significantly more support in terms of just the overall adjustment. So Karen, I know you have some thoughts about this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Vicki. I think it's really important as part of the guide is to really help your teams realign their priorities as well. In this shifting day-to-day world, I know even for us, every day it seems like we're adjusting to how we're now working. And I think being open both as a guide as well as a listener for your teams to understand how they can adjust to this working style, knowing that a lot of institutions have team members who have worked a very defined schedule, 8:30 to 4:30 or something similar. And those kind of timelines, if you will, are going to be disrupted over the coming weeks if they're not already. And trying to ensure that you understand and help your teammates understand what's important and why, but also being open to how they may adjust how they've accomplished those in the past. I think it is all about being a bit agile, if you will, for all of us to have clarity on what is needed, but also being very open and supportive that how we approach and accomplish these things in these changing times will be very different than it was 2 weeks ago for most of us. And really letting people find their time to be productive and also not increase the level of stress that is probably already significantly increased from where it was in the normalcy that they experienced more than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And are we hearing good examples of things like that with the use of technology and, you know, the ability to at least communicate in different ways?
Yeah, I think you're seeing institutions explore and use some of the existing technology they have already, just differently, right? When people were connected face to face and in parts of campuses or in buildings very close to each other, how do they leverage now their technology that they have that isn't necessarily new, but really expanding the use of it to put up, whether it be team sites or portal sites for people, and really ensuring some of the common tools such as your calendaring system, that you're really paying attention to maintaining that, to understand if you're caring for somebody or if you have children at home, you know, if you have hours of the day that need to be dedicated to other things to keep the personal, professional, and the world around you continuing in this disruption, that you help your colleagues understand that so that they're not expecting you and they have clarity on when they can engage with you effectively. I just think in today's world of connectivity, there's a lot of different ways people are approaching it, but it's not about rethinking necessarily what you do. It's expanding how you do it so that people can be connected when they can. And it feels a bit like 24/7, but that's the technology that's running the 24/7 versus the people.
There are a lot of institutions that have worked on business continuity and disaster planning for years, and this is the first time they've had to use those plans. So in many cases, their plans are online, or their guidelines have been in place, and they're pointing their colleagues to those resources that are available. And then in some cases, those resources are outdated, and so they're having to either rewrite guidelines, or they're learning to be very flexible about the approach in this time. So in some cases, we're seeing institutions ask employees not only to be flexible. I mean, the organization itself is having to be flexible, but they're also asking employees to be flexible as well, as together the organizations and institutions work through the solutions. So everyone is having to learn to be more patient than they might otherwise like to be as the solutions are achieved. And that brings us to the second point, which is the communication. And not everyone, of course, communicates in the same way, and communication styles vary, and the way to reach students and faculty and staff is going to vary depending on the communication style and the way that people are not only used to working, but the way they're comfortable being reached. And so having multiple ways to reach people and multiple ways to communicate is extremely important at this time. So whether it's text or email or community boards or video or push notifications, whatever those forms of communications are, it's important that the organization have multiple ways to get information out, because not everyone will receive information the same way. And setting expectations becomes even more important, because the fundamentals of helping people adapt to change are critical at this time, because the uncertainty around change makes people so nervous, and yet that's really the only thing we know, is that there's going to continue to be a lot of change. So communicating as much as possible, as often as possible, is what's important. Letting people know what you know as soon as you know it is going to help. So Karen, I know you also had some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, one of the thoughts I've been thinking about is I've seen it done a lot in technology projects, especially as they're getting to that go live stage, right, where teams of people will get together and have what they typically call a daily stand-up. And it's usually 15 minutes tops, right? But I think, and keeping in mind that everybody's not going to be able to come together physically or virtually simultaneously in these changing times all the time. So I would encourage leaders to start a cadence of having a communication of some sort that maybe you can video, maybe you can follow up with a message as well, but really helping your teams understand day to day what the priorities are, especially knowing that those priorities can change as we've seen over the last 7 days, very dramatically even overnight. But trying to have a cadence of a stand up with your teams daily. And I'd also think about how to not only start their days with some information, but end their days with some information, including celebrating the little changes that are occurring. You know, to have all of your team connected and working effectively in these changing environments, and to be supporting different faculty who may only have taught face-to-face, who are now figuring out how to do that online. I think as we think about big, large IT efforts, we often forget to celebrate the little successes that occur along the way. And I'm a big believer in positive thinking. So I think if you could start the day with some guidance on the new priorities and some expectations and how people can connect with you as a leader for the support they need, and then think about how you can also end their day in a way to help them understand all the efforts that are going on and all the help that that is bringing to the communities that you support for faculty, students, teaching and learning, and all of the administration of the institutions.
I like the ideas of stand-ups because they also help people get familiar with technology that they might not use on a regular basis. If they're logging in for a 15-minute meeting every day, the platform becomes a little bit easier, and they're, you know, that the comfort level increases. And I know for, you know, working in an agile environment is kind of hard, but for change management, I think it's one of the best practices that remote teams can implement, because it keeps everybody, you know, together. And if your expectations do need to change, there's already a place where that can be communicated as well.
Karen, how do you see roles and responsibilities being redefined right now? What, you know, one of the things I know is top of mind for institutions is having some redundancy in responsibilities, and knowing that there's some planning in case there are people have to be out either because they're sick or because they have to take care of sick relatives or close family members. What is that, what you have in mind there, or is there something more that you're thinking?
There's kind of two aspects I was thinking about as I wrote that bullet. One is, you know, you have, when you think about our technology teams, we have a lot of resources that support classroom technology, right? And event technology and things like that. These are folks who understand how to use the technology that even today is being used at a remote ability as opposed to on-campus ability. They also typically have really good relationships in understanding faculty and how they use a classroom, students and how they engage with faculty. And so thinking about those resources who may be now deployed at home, who didn't necessarily have roles and responsibilities that easily went with their remote work ability right now, they are probably people who can be really redeployed to support faculty and students in this transition, because they typically already have a good relationship with those communities. The other folks I really thought about with this are also our student workers. Now, I'd encourage anybody who's considering this to obviously check with your financial aid office. But the reality is, if your students are still engaged and you're still actively delivering academic services, they are likely still able to be working with you with their financial aid funds, helping them with financial stability, while also redeploying them to support these students and faculty who are now working in a different way, and have a trusted relationship that is very different than they have with the administration of our institutions. I know as a CIO, I leverage student workers immensely, and I learned an awful lot from them. And so I just think that they would be a great resource to continue to tap, even in different ways, as they've become remote as well at your campuses, even if it is just in supporting other students. I think, you know, to anticipate what is coming into your call centers these days for support, both on administratively and technology-wise, I can't imagine what that is, but I could quickly understand that there's probably a top 10 or top 20 you could deploy students and others around to help support with.
Those are great suggestions. And then what kind of, you know, when I think about training on new tools and using people to support new needs, I know there have been so many vendors stepping up to offer both new tools and new training opportunities. And one of the things that we've seen in response from higher education is that, you know, we're not already using your product or service, we're not likely to implement it now. It's just not the right time. But what kind of new training do you think, or new opportunities could there be in the midst of a crisis like this?
What I've seen institutions do really well as they're trying to adopt new technology is to leverage it. So when I think about that, if you, for instance, if you take your learning tools and the tools that are enterprise-wide that can really be supported, and maybe create a course in your learning management system that everybody can be enrolled in, that focused on faculty and students and administrators with easy resources so that they don't have to go to the web to find the various resources. There are a ton of them happening out there, which is great from a community support perspective. But how do you filter that for your institution and your organization? So let's go back to kind of redefining roles and responsibilities. How can we use that learning management system to put up some of those changes that people need to be aware of? Maybe build out the top 10 things or top 20 things that people are needing support with, and help these folks learn while using the tools. At the same time, while using those tools to learn something new, I'm also learning how to use the tool to be able to support other folks. And so be creative in thinking about how you may be using a learning management environment internally, right? Where you may have students put up videos, may have others within there, and it doesn't go through a production cycle. It may not go through all the bells and whistles and checks to be of the highest quality, but quality may not be the need right now. It may just be the information. So I think about how you use existing tools differently in instances like this to engage people beyond what they're used to. And again, it's not new tools, but I think I've seen a lot of interesting uses in learning management systems outside of the courses that bring communities of people together to share information in a secure and think of it as an extension of your virtual, you know, an extension of your campus virtually in a way.
That makes a lot of sense. And then it becomes a lasting resource at the institution, and you have a permanent environment to look to. The other thing that I've heard from CIOs as we've been talking over the last week or so is that as people have been looking to move home, there's a whole series of decisions that have to be made around what the institution is going to provide versus what the employee is expected to provide for themselves in a working environment. So there's a basic assumption that the institution, for example, will provide a network access, for example, and a computer if you don't, you know, a network will be available. But in terms of internet access, there's a basic assumption that everyone will have access to the internet from their home. And so having some sort of checklist available to give to employees or make available online or as part of a communication plan when you're giving workers this, this edict that, now your department or you're part of this redeployment to working from home or remotely, and here's what you're responsible for, and here's what you can expect from us in this transition, I think is really important. And the same thing goes for students. We're reading a lot about and hearing a lot from institutions and from students online about how unprepared and really how they're going to struggle to access the online content, even though the institutions that they attend are going to be delivering content online. They didn't sign up for online courses. They signed up for in-person courses. And so if they don't have the ability to access the courses online, how are they going to do that? And so while the institutions have so far communicated a plan to deliver courses online or to make the instruction available, there has not been a clear plan that we've seen broadly communicated to students about what they're responsible for, other than attending class online. In other words, it doesn't appear that, the assumption, there's just an unstated assumption from what we can see that the students will somehow understand and find the access that they need to access courses remotely. And I think for some students that is not only going to be a financial challenge, but also a knowledge challenge, just in understanding what does that mean? What do I need to do to be able to access my courses? Just because they get a text or an email that they can read on their phone doesn't necessarily mean that they understand exactly what they have to do to access a course online. So Karen, maybe Chris, you have thoughts about that too. I know, at least we have a lot of employees at our company that have students that have been sent home in the last week that aren't going back to their campuses. So we have a lot of, not only do our clients talk to us about this, but we are experiencing this at home.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's interesting about access, and we've brought up a couple of points, and will later in a blog post this week about this move to remoteness isn't necessarily, delivering, to Karen's point, the best quality of courses or the best quality information. It is really about continuity and making sure that instruction is being delivered, and so little outside of, managing a remote team. However, to your point, Vicki, our just because content is available online, is it accessible via a mobile device? And what does that do for students who don't necessarily learn well remotely, and, those kinds of things? So I think it's interesting to say, you can manage your courses remotely, or you can manage your teams remotely. But the simple fact of the matter is if your course isn't designed to be an online course, the concern is making sure the instruction is delivered. And then I think institutions are going to have to deal with consumption of that material by students and the tools that they're using to do that, and how that affects their learning, for sure.
I think in some of the institutions especially where there's different labor issues to deal with, the idea of providing the right tools and then having clear communication around what's provided versus what the employee needs to provide becomes really sticky. And that's something that we've heard from our clients this past week, is that it's been a real challenge for institutions to scramble to figure out, what they're going to do about getting enough equipment into the hands of their employees. Some employees may even have computers, but they're older, they don't have cameras, or they don't have the ability to, they don't have enough power to access the online meetings and things like that. So these are all things that that the institutions are struggling with. So it's even beyond just, did the employees have internet access, or did they have a computer of some kind, but do they have the right equipment that they need? And then the security, of course, is another significant topic that is popping up all over the place. How do they maintain their security posture? And there's a lot more vulnerability.
I think the other thing to not lose sight of is there's been a great focus on continuing academics, which I agree with wholeheartedly, but I think we also have to focus on how to continue the academic support, especially in times of isolation. When you think of, when students are moving away from campus, they're moving away from a community as well. And they may be struggling with a lot of things that we just talked about. And I think ensuring that you can enable your student affairs and your support teams, if you will, in this virtual environment, it's going to be critical for them to be available and for them to be accessible to students as they go forward, so that they have a place to go for these concerns and questions, even if there isn't just an answer. Having a place to go and having a place to discuss them and even encourage them. We saw that greatly with students who had to relocate from campus. Institutions weren't enabling it, and they were very quickly in social media trying to find help with each other, right? And so I think the more institutions can help those students do that within the community that they have chosen, the more connected students may remain as we come out of this epidemic, if you will.
I think
Go ahead. I was just thinking about the remoteness of the workforce and how difficult that is, because staying connected with a remote workforce means, I think, having a sense of community is really important. And so one of the things that is so amazing about higher ed is the sense of identity that higher ed typically feels with the community, and I think that will help strengthen the work that higher ed does overall, because people that work in higher education typically, especially in the administrative areas, do tend to have a very strong sense of community, and not only allegiance to the institution, but a strong sense of support for each other and to the student body. And so that should, I think that will bode really well to help get each other through, and also to help provide the remote support for students at a really difficult time, and probably help maintain those important person-to-person connections. I would venture to guess that people will find ways to collaborate with each other online in lieu of those office connections that they've been used to having. But Chris, what were you going to say?
I was going to say it's great, a great illustration of the last 2 points that we have about, encouraging patience and respect and being emotionally intelligent about the things that are going on. What I find is interesting for, our administrators and our faculty is they're not just supporting a remote workforce, but then they are kind of the middle person who is trying to manage a remote classroom or a team of students, and many of the things that they're facing are decisions that are being made at higher levels in the institution, and then the students are communicating either with their professors or their student affairs offices that that's not possible for me, or that's difficult for me, and I'm having trouble with these kinds of things. So I think it's an interesting position that our faculty and our student affairs and offices have been put in, because while they're probably used to being the middleman, the escalation point is much higher now, and probably I'm sure the volume is much greater. And so I think it's remote work. I mean, we all work remotely. Remote work requires respect and patience and emotional intelligence, but I think now the need is much greater and at a bigger volume.
It's really easy to misconstrue information too in written communication. I think that our teams have, we learned this over time as well. We've been a remote company for the 20 years that we've been in business, and it's so easy to misunderstand intent. And I know for us, that one of the keys to building a strong organization is to be willing to have a conversation about things. And sometimes that's hard to do because people are busy. And I think for higher ed, this strain on the organization is going to be particularly difficult, but encouraging people to pick up the phone if there's a question, and reminding everyone that even if it feels uncomfortable because maybe you feel like you should know the answer to a question, or you maybe have already asked the question about how to implement a technology, or working from home should be more comfortable, that, or you feel like it maybe should be more comfortable for you, that you need to be comfortable asking for help or support if you need it, because the transition isn't the same for everyone. And I know that we found that over time, as we've, not everyone that comes to work with us has worked from home before. So sometimes when we bring people to work with us, it can be a real adjustment in the beginning, and they will have, sometimes people have more questions than that. Some people have more questions than others about adjusting to, online meetings, or accessing email remotely, or all the things that we do. So I can only imagine and what higher ed in general is going to go through, because you multiply that by hundreds and thousands of people, and it's the strain on the infrastructure will be really significant. But that's when I think the patience is going to be, not only patience with people that are asking the questions, but the people that have the questions also need to be patient and understand that, that a lot of people are waiting for answers. And we were on the phone yesterday with a client who said that they had changed passwords a few months ago, and they'd given faculty and students advance warning. And anyway, about 20% of their faculty and students didn't change their passwords. So of course the passwords expired, and it happened to all happen in the last week. And so then everybody that didn't change their password had to have a manual intervention to have their passwords reset. So as they inquired about having their passwords reset, it was about 200, except nobody asked once. Everybody, when they didn't get an answer the first time within about an hour, they asked multiple times. So the requests just continued to pile on. And so it was thousands of requests instead of several hundred requests. So I think we have to, whatever that communication is out from the institution, in terms of, if you have a question, be prepared to wait, whatever it is, 24 hours before you ask again, or whatever you need to communicate. I would encourage you to think about letting people know how long they should expect to wait for an answer due to the unusually high call volume at this time, as you probably are getting right now with your doctors and your cable company and everybody else who provides service.
I think it's also important as a leader to just make sure you ask your people how they're doing. There's a lot of stress out there, even if people are not directly impacted by it. The financial discussions and everything that's going around is incredibly stressful. And just you asking, even if they don't have a response, oftentimes gives people a lift of caring from other people around them. So don't forget to ask people how they are and if they need help. They may not ask you, even as a good connected leader, because times have changed. People are going to be fearful of losing jobs and other things as we go forward with this. And so I would encourage all of you as leaders to really ask your people how can you help them? Even if they say they don't need it, it'll probably be well worth statement to make for your people to know that you care and that you're there and available for them.
Well
Great.
said.
Yeah, these are all great thoughts, and I do thank you both for having the discussion and talking through all those points. We did want to remind everybody that Tambellini is aggregating resources from around the industry, as well as creating resources like this webinar recording and these open office hours to help institutions go through the transition and operationalize their plans. We also wanted to mention that our resources are available for any institution. They are not restricted to Tambellini members, and they are free. So if you need assistance and you would like to join our office hours, they are going to happen every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. We will announce topics at the beginning of each week that we're going to discuss, and you can register for them. In addition to that, we are also offering access to our analysts. So if you have a particular situation on campus that you'd like some help with, or you need some expert opinions on, you can schedule a 30-minute session with our analysts. And again, those are open and available to any institution that would need assistance. All of the resources are on this page on the TambelliniGroup.com's website. You can access them from the homepage or this specific address. But we wanted to let you know and offer assistance and make sure that everybody understands that we value the higher education community, and we are really, looking for ways that we can help.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Karen.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. And we hope everyone's doing well and is healthy and safe, and you have a good rest of the day. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Bye.
Bye.